I've got some pro tips for new vinyl collectors on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, small chain of independent shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local, you can shop online at ntxvinyl.com. Please subscribe here on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're a new collector, this one is especially geared towards you. But if you're a longtime collector, check it out as well, because hopefully these tips will inspire some others, and you can put it in the comments, and maybe we can make an even longer list of pro tips for new collectors who are just getting into this hobby, right? I've done plenty of videos like this in the past, and typically the tips that I come forth with, or that a lot of other people have as well, have to do with, organizing your records, how to clean your records, how to store your records, a lot of very tactical things, which are very important and very useful. For this video, I was trying to think a little higher level in regards to new collectors as they're getting into this hobby. They've got a turntable, they've got a few records. I'm trying to think of tips that would really get them over the hump. Like, I think there's a lot of people who are inching into this hobby and exploring it and maybe testing it out. I feel like you've got to get to a certain point with the hobby to where you can truly appreciate it, right? And I don't think that has to do only with the value and the quality of your equipment and the records you own. I think it's a big picture thing. So my first pro tip as far as how to enhance your vinyl listening kind of experience and how to actually get to a point where you can see futuristically, like, oh, this is what this is supposed to look like. Now I understand why so many people are so passionate about this, right? And I think the first thing, if I was gonna give a recommendation or some advice to a new collector about, as they're inching into this, is first and foremost, when you're deciding to invest in a record, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And the number one reason should be the music. Seems like a simple thing, seems like something you shouldn't have to tell somebody, but there's a lot of caveats to buying a record. Is it used? Is it new? Is it limited edition? Is it color? Am I going to be able to find it again? Like, there's a lot of decision criteria that goes into buying a record if you're going to invest, $20 or $30 or more in it, right? All I'm saying is just think about the music first. Try and block out everything else. If you're already familiar with the music, you've heard it before, make the decision based on whether or not you're going to listen to it frequently. Like, that's the most important part. It doesn't matter what it's worth on the secondary market, if you think it's rare or not, all those types of things that kind of, again, affect this hobby in different ways to different people. But I think as new collectors come in and get kind of wrapped up in the excitement of getting into this hobby, you can also get wrapped up into a scenario where you're buying things for the wrong reasons. And so again, pro tip number one is just buy things for the music. Make your choices about what you want to buy based on whether or not you're going to enjoy it, you're going to enjoy listening to it and owning it for the long term. I think that's very important and something that a lot of new collectors probably forget, because you get caught up in, going after the new shiny thing, if you will, in a record store or at a big box store or even online, right? There's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of choices about what to buy. Just anchor it in the music, and I think you'll be much better in the long run, right? Tip number two. This is huge. If you're new to vinyl collecting, maybe you don't know a lot of other people that collect records and you're kind of on your own doing it. So first of all, congrats for taking the leap without getting talked into it by somebody. But I think tip number two is engage in the community. There is a huge vinyl community out there. It doesn't matter, whether we're talking physically around a local record store. If you don't have that environment, I don't care if your social media platform of choice is Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, there is a community. There are people on all of these platforms and out there in the real world who are just as passionate about this as I am, and as hopefully you will become, right, as a new collector. I can't stress enough how beneficial it has been for me personally, and I know a lot of other people, to engage in a community where not only you're getting to show off what you're spinning, but you're seeing what other people are spinning, and it really inspires you to be active and to discover new music, to try out new things. Very, very important. So find a community somewhere, somehow, online or physical, of other people who dig the same types of music as you as a starting point, and then it branches out from there, right? I've got a group called Now Spinning on Facebook that is exactly built for this. So if you're interested in joining a community of really respectful and passionate vinyl enthusiasts, hit the link in the description for the Now Spinning group. It's really great. This isn't an advertisement for that group, but it's one place to start. There's a lot of great groups out there again, and a lot of great platforms for it. But engaging in that community will do wonders for your vinyl collecting, because you're going to learn a ton, you're going to discover new music, you're going to learn tons of tips and tricks along the way about how to go about collecting and how to enhance the experience in listening to vinyl as a medium. So tip number 2, engage in the community. Tip number 3, this is mostly specific to vintage or used or secondhand records. Something that I regret not doing earlier on is when you start out collecting and you're going to go to a record store, or you're going to hit a thrift store, you're going to go to a flea market, and you're going to look through used records, focus on condition earlier than you think you should. I know if I think back to my early days of collecting, I would pretty much buy anything. If the cover looked cool, didn't matter if it was kind of beat up, record looked a little scratched, it didn't matter, it was cheap, I just got it. I wanted to build my collection quickly. I think that's the urge to fight, the urge that you have to fight. Focus on condition, try and be more particular and more choosy earlier in the game, and you're going to be much better off for it later on, because I've got plenty of records still in my collection to this day that I bought 10 20 years ago when I was a novice in some ways and just kind of starting out myself, and they're all beat up, because I wasn't focused on that. I really didn't have an eye for it, and I was just impatient, and I just really went really quickly. So I think focusing on condition and trying to be picky about what you buy, if it's vintage and used, and it should, at least to the to the naked eye, should appear pretty visually, clean, if you will. With more experience, you'll get better at that. Obviously, the more records you handle, the more records you listen to, you're going to get better at gauging, is this going to play well, based on visually looking at it. And of course, if you have the opportunity to listen to it at a record store, that's hugely beneficial. But if you're buying online, or you're buying someplace that doesn't have a listening station, you're at a garage sale or something, just try and be a little picky, try and be more choosy, and I think that'll be really helpful in the long run for you as a collector. Number 4 on the list, this kind of goes hand in hand, I was already alluding to it, it's just be patient, especially these days. And I say that not only on vintage records and used records, because those will always come around again, unless we're talking about super rarities. But in general, the vast majority of records, there are a lot out there. And if you don't see the one you're looking for at the right price point, at the right condition at that time, just be patient. This applies even more to new vinyl. It takes a long time to get a record pressed these days if you're an artist or a label. And so it's really putting a pressure on consumers to be patient and wait for the next reissue or wait for that new release, because the impatience of collectors, especially new ones entering the market, is what's driving up the secondary market prices. So you've got reissues that have come out in the last year or two that just haven't been pressed again yet. And people are impatient and they want it now, and that's driving up the price. That's frustrating for everybody, especially for those who don't own that record in their collection, right? So be patient. They're all going to come back around. As a generalization, there are some things that maybe will never get pressed again, yes. But as a generalization, I think as far as mainstream popular music is concerned, most everything is gonna get pressed. It just takes time. So that's a huge tip for someone just entering this hobby and not having any understanding of why they can't find a particular record for less than, X number of $100. Well, if you be patient, you may luck out, and it may come soon, and it may be 25 bucks normal retail value for a record, as opposed to $250 on the secondary market, right? So patience is a virtue. I try my best to practice it at all times in regards to this hobby, because it can be really beneficial. So that's big. Last on the list, pro tip number 5. I've talked about this before in other videos, and I think it's worth repeating. I talked about at the beginning of this video in regards to that threshold of kind of where you need to be to really start enjoying music. And I think all of these things align to that. And so does number 5. And that's your turntable. I can't stress how important it is to invest a little bit of money. I'm not talking about thousands of dollars. Invest a little bit of money earlier than you'd like to. And what I mean by that is, again, there's a lot of people who are just now getting into this hobby in the last months or years. And, they figure, I don't know if this is going to stick. Rightfully so. It's a commitment, right? You got to figure out where you're going to play your records, where you're going to store your records, how you're going to afford to, continue to be a part of this hobby and this community, right? And continue to buy new records. And maybe you love it, but you're just not quite sure if this is something you're going to do long term. So I think a lot of people put it off, meaning they buy a 50 or 75 or $100 turntable, which a lot of people start with. And there's nothing wrong with that. You've got to have an entry point somewhere, and that's a low barrier to entry because the cost is so low. But I think a lot of people stick with that way too long. And what I mean by that is if you just invest a couple $100, two, three, $400. I'm not saying you're going to get an audiophile system. I'm not saying you're going to get the best sound out of your records. What I am saying is just that little leap from 50 to $100 to, let's say, 2 to 400 is going to make a massive difference in your experience with your records, because they're going to sound so much better. The all-in-one players with the built-in speakers, there's just not a great sound there. You still get the experience a little bit of what it's like to spin a record, but you're not really getting the full breadth or even a taste of the full breadth of what and how a vinyl record's supposed to be experienced, because you simply can't get it out of those speakers and out of one of those turntables. So, and I think that's a deterrent, because I think a lot of people just kind of, they get a few records, they get that cheap turntable, and then they kind of burn out on it because it's just not all that exciting. Some people take that leap immediately, and it's enough to light the fire in them to really become a long-term collector. But I have a feeling a lot of people, it's an exciting thing. Maybe they get it as a gift. They get a couple records. It's more of a novelty thing, which I can completely understand, because at that stage, it is kind of a novelty. But you don't have to make that much more of a commitment to where you can start to see it and you go, oh, I get it now. This is really cool. This is a much cooler turntable. It sounds much better. It enhances the environment. Not only, is the turntable itself important, but where you're listening. You got to have a really nice listening space. I've done videos on that where the experience of listening to a record is not just the amount of money you've spent on the turntable and the records you have. It's like, do you have a comfortable spot in your home to where it's really conducive to sitting down and focusing on the music? Because if you don't, then just stream the music. It's very little difference then. But if you're committed to this, you really want to give this a shot, put a level of commitment in, get to a turntable and get to an environment to where you can get a taste of what that true experience is like. And the last thing I'll say too is, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't have budget for even a couple $100. Keep in mind, like, if you decide, hey, I'm gonna do what GI's saying, I'm gonna spend a couple $100 on a turntable and a nice set of maybe powered speakers, just a good, decent setup, right? Again, I'm not talking audiophile, I'm talking a few $100. If you decide after, a week or a month or whatever period that, no, this really just isn't for me, I tried it, guess what? You can sell that stuff so easy. Everyone's looking for used turntables. Everyone's looking for used speakers. Everyone's looking for used vinyl. You can get your money back on that stuff almost immediately and almost the full value, if not more, depending on what records you bought, because they may have gone up in value, depending on what you collected. So that's just kind of a side note, but I feel like there's a big deterrent around budget and people just saying, I have no more money. Well, just keep in mind that you can invest it and you can get it back pretty easy if you need to get your money back out of that turntable if you decide this isn't for you and you don't want to commit long term. So that's 5 pro tips. 1, focus on the music when you buy, engage in a community somewhere, focus on condition, especially on vintage and used records, be patient with new vinyl because more represses are coming. And think about that level of where you're at in your turntable and how serious you want to commit to this thing. If you really want to give it a shot, I definitely recommend getting a mid-level turntable. Again, a couple $100 will make all the difference in the world. I think you'll again get a taste of what that experience could be like. And then you progress from there. It takes years, but it's an exciting thing. It's a fun hobby, and I think if you again get over that hump, get over that threshold, then you can really get a taste for what it's like, which for people like me who've been in it for years and years have a full understanding of. But it's hard to grasp that when you're brand new. So hopefully these tips helped. I would love to hear some other tips from collectors, new and old, in the comments section. As always, really appreciate you watching. I've got some other videos here that are primed and are very related to this discussion. So I'll pop those out. Check them out on the channel. Really appreciate all the support, and we'll see you again next time on Talking About Records.